So when young writers ask me for advice, the first thing I tell them is do not go into this business. It's collapsing. But the second thing I tell them is, look, you have to be comfortable with the fact that your work's not going to be very good a lot of the time. And that you have to take the not very good work and make it better rather than thinking, well, I can't start because it's not perfect yet. It's not perfect in my head. It's never going to be perfect.
I'm David Duchovny, and this is Fail Better, a show where failure, not success, shapes who we are. Megan McArdle is a columnist for The Washington Post, where she covers economics, public policy, and societal issues, and, as we find out in this conversation, pie. She's also the author of The Upside of Down, a book that takes a deep look at failure, why we fear it, why we need it, and how often it lays the groundwork for future success. Megan and I talked about everything from embracing some degree of risk to her nuanced relationship with being a libertarian or a liberal-tarian. Here's that conversation. I'm fascinated by you because you're at the vanguard of this kind of reimagining around failure. And this podcast is nominally about failing better. I don't even understand what that means anymore because I'm sure, as you know, the more you interrogate or investigate failure, the less those terms, failure and success, mean anything. They start to kind of bleed into one another and become part of the same experience, which is life.
Yes.
And I think that, you were really early on kind of bridging that consciousness of tech failure, which was, we all kind of fell in love with, like, move fast and break things, fail. Failure is great. And now we're kind of investigating that idea. So I was just wondering, this is not how I intended to begin this conversation, which is always how I fail. But I guess I'd ask, if you were writing your book today, The Upside of Down, which I like very much as a title, would you change anything? Would you like to write an addendum to that book, it's now 10 years old, isn't it? It's about 10 years old.
Yeah, more than 10 years old.
Has it changed at all for you?
Yeah, I think I would probably write a somewhat different book now, in part because I'm older. And I think as you get older, the idea of failure and success, as you say, becomes less clear. When you're 30, you have an idea about the world that ends with you, living your glamorous life, whatever that is, whether it's on a homestead or like jetting around between Cannes and Macau. And then there was actually a great line from Tom Hanks where some woman ran up to Tom Hanks and she said, "Mr. Hanks, it must be so amazing to be you." And he said, honestly, no matter who you are, at the end of the day, it's just one damn thing after another. Mm-hmm. And, I don't know many people who really feel, even like these incredibly successful people, who none of them really feels like they ever reached that point, even if they did objectively reach that point and acknowledge that they have the glamour job or whatever it is. They're not having the experience they imagined at 30. And so I think now I would probably talk more just about what it even means to succeed or fail, what it even means to, reach what you were aiming for or not reach it. Because I think most people in their lives often realize that the thing they didn't reach, that was a good thing. And that the thing that they were aiming for was not something that would have made them happy. Some of them realize that maybe being happy isn't all they want out of life, right? They want some sort of higher meaning, or they want to feel like they're struggling in a great cause.
I think that,
and I would have done more of
struggle.
That
word struggle is very interesting.
Yeah.
Because I think struggle in many ways is happiness. Happiness is a word that I don't understand either, but struggle feels like immediacy, feels like involvement, feels closer to a transcendent moment. At least if you can look forward to a transcendent moment. And I think as one gets older, one realizes that transcendent moments are few and far between. And I feel like life is in the creating of these things to kind of inspire you to get off your ass and try to figure something out, and it's not the actual figuring out.
Yeah, I actually just had some friends, a couple of friends who I've known for a really long time, were at my house for a week. I took the week off, or I tried to take the week off. I don't know, it was managed, but and we just sat around. We went for walks. And I was thinking that when we were 25, this would have seemed like a very lame vacation. And I can't really point to anything in particular. We just sat around and talked. And a lot of what we did was what people our age do, which is you're like, this thing in my body broke. I didn't even know I had that thing. And it was delightful. And we all left feeling so renewed because ultimately, if there was one thing that I wish I could convince younger people of, there's a great line, and I can't remember the name of the rabbi who said it, but he said, when I was younger, I admired people who are clever, and now that I'm old, I admire people who are kind. And I think that, which I really just completely resonate with, because it's easier to be clever than to be kind consistently. But I also think that when you look back and you see who the friends that you still have when you're 50 or 60 are, it's not necessarily the friends you thought you would have. It's not the most entertaining people in your group. It's not the most, exciting people in your group. It's the people who were just there year after year after year. I mean, my friends are very entertaining and exciting and all that, but it's just that love and friendship and all of that stuff, it is much less about the movie high. Mm-hmm. And it's much more about just the everyday minutes of sitting around and complaining about your divorce or your kids or your torn labrum. And
I've had that. I've had the labrum.
Yeah. So, and that's actually the richness of life, is just being there with people, which is not to say I'm very lucky. I have a great job. You've had a lot of success as well. But it really just gets more and more true that on your deathbed, you're not going to be like, wow, I'm so glad I spent the extra day talking to someone important and doing that. You're kind of really, you do look more and more to the work you've done that you really think is great, which in my case, I don't know about you, my favorite pieces of my work are not necessarily my readers' favorite pieces of my work.
What are your favorite pieces?
Oh, I wrote a 3,000-word essay on the history of pie. And I loved that piece. It was like my heart and soul. There was a piece that I wrote.
Do you love pie?
I love pie. So I grew up, American pie gets a bad rap because almost no one makes their crust from scratch anymore. And making a crust from scratch is pretty difficult to do, and it's especially difficult to do if you've never had it, if you've never had a good pie crust. And so, yeah, I am obsessed. My mother and my grandmother were amazing pie bakers, and my grandfather, who had grown up on a farm and left as quickly as possible, owned a gas station in Western New York, and then at the age of 50 decided he needed a 2-acre garden. So the grandchildren would go up every summer and we'd pick all this fruit, and then we'd make pies and jellies and so forth. But for me, pie, my favorite food in the entire world is pie made with purple raspberries, which are most people don't even know that this kind of raspberry exists. It's not a black raspberry. It's not a red raspberry. Yeah, they don't really ship well, so they're not commercially viable. So you basically have to grow them or buy them right where they were grown, which you can do.
Sensitive berry.
They're sensitive, delicate. They're special. Yeah. And this is my favorite food in the whole world. It's purple raspberry pie. Wow. So I wrote a 3,000-word essay on pie and family, and also because I am a nerd, on how technology had kind of eclipsed the pie.
Well, that's exactly what I'm thinking when you're saying this, because I know you write on technology a lot.
Yeah.
And
it's a
wondering
tech story.
if we've lost, in your TED Talk that I watched, you talk about borrowing from the future or something like that.
Yeah, borrowing from the future.
So that this is not you're saying, so we should, if we lose our jobs because of AI, well, that's just something we're going to have to swallow because we're we're giving it to the future. We're paying it forward
Yeah.
in some way. But what you don't address in that talk, and what I think you're addressing right now in your discussion of pie, is do we lose something just by farming out so much of our shit to technology? We lose, let's say, the mastery of the pie crust is what you're talking about, which is a 19th century skill, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that people say easy as pie now, because still say it, because pie is much harder to make than cake. But in the 19th century, that wasn't true, because the machines that we use to make cakes now, and the mixes and all of those things, but also just a stand mixer just makes cake much easier. Baking powder and all of these new novelties, ovens with regulated thermostats. No, it's absolutely true. But I would say a couple things. And the first is that I think, well, a lot of people have lost pie. That's a choice. I have not lost pie. I have a pie crust thawing that I froze. I made and froze earlier, thawing in my fridge right now. And I'm going to make a pie tonight. That we can preserve things. But yes, it is true.
We can, but I think and I'm using gross generalizations now, but what technology offers is ease. And we can look at that with a moral valence and say, well, ease, everybody should have ease, but over the long term, ease eats away at us, I think.
And I think that that's right. But let me think about this. If you ever go to see a beautiful illuminated manuscript, like the Book of Kells, right? Or any of the old medieval manuscripts, they're amazing, right? We don't do anything that intricate, that you read something, it doesn't look like that. And a lot of books looked like that in the medieval era. But they looked like that precisely because books were so rare and most people couldn't read. And so we did lose something when the printing press came out. We lost a lot of things. I mean, it really is true that the printing press, if you look at the wars of religion it triggered, if you look at the witch burnings and all of these other terrible things, we lost something with mass literacy. We didn't just gain something. Culture shifted. There's a great book by Walter Ong on the difference between oral and written culture, and it is different. But we also gained a lot, right? And I personally would not go back to the era pre-mass literacy, although we might be going back there anyway. I might not have a say in that. But right. I think that it is true that you now, I think what you can do is, first of all, think about what's worth preserving, right? And I think people in your business and in my business are thinking about that a lot right now, right? AI is enabling movie producers to do things that were not possible before, not possible at that cost, right? Special effects are getting better because it's easier to do things on screens that you couldn't do with physical effects. Although I will say, looking at the old physical effects in like Star Wars, they were pretty amazing. And
Sure.
And there is something tactile about them that I miss in the new CGI stuff when I watch the new Star Wars series. And in journalism, we're thinking about what is this going to do to our business from the outside as people just use AI rather than newspapers, but also what's it going to do from the inside? Derek Thompson, who just started a newsletter, used to work for The Atlantic, just started a newsletter on abundance and progress. He said, something that really resonates with me, which is that you don't think to write, you write to think.
Well, that's exactly right.
Right. And so if you're not doing the writing yourself, that you're not having the experience. And I will say, though, that I think most people are not as good writers as
and
Derek Thompson.
They don't care to have the experience.
Yeah, they don't. But they're also, I wonder if they are having that experience. Like for me, yesterday I was writing and it was going reasonably well. So I just spent, 6.5 hours, and it just flew by. Right. It just like, and I was actually wrestling with the P's. It was like, this needs to go, this is too long, and so forth. But the experience of doing that, of just losing yourself in it, is so intensely, when I get out, I feel exhausted and wonderful. And I think most people just don't ever feel that way about writing, and that's okay. Everyone has their thing, right? And so the question is, how do the people like me preserve what we are getting out of writing right now? How do people in entertainment who are using AI to make images, how do they preserve that experience?
Well, the question is also, if you take the cliche of, blood, sweat, and tears dripping onto the page. Is that part of the page that people are consuming? If AI creates a page of writing, there are no blood, sweat, and tears on that page. There are on yours. Is that something that the reader can feel, sense, appreciate? Or is that just a writer like myself trying to hold up the fact that the process is all important?
I actually think that AI is probably going to split out the middle pieces of work in my business. What it's going to do is journalism. Yeah. What it's going to do is take over the kind of just fairly straightforwardly, flatly written explainers by someone whose byline I look at the bylines, but most of our readers don't look at the bylines. When I worked at The Economist that doesn't have bylines, I used to love when people would say, "Oh yeah, I've seen your stuff." And I was like, "Really? How did you know that?" Right? Because they don't know. They literally didn't even know that The Economist doesn't have bylines. They never look. Yeah. But that stuff, I think, is going to be taken over by AI. What I think is still going to be incredibly valuable is, number one, sources, right? Like AI is not going to be able to get congressional staffers drunk for quite some time. So those people...
The AI can get them drunk on their own supply, though.
Well, fair enough, but it's not going to get them to tell them secrets and then print them.
I don't know.
And then the other side, though, I think is going to be, it's becoming more and more important to build a relationship with your audience, for them to feel like they know who you are. And
I struggle with that. Yeah, I struggle with that. Yeah, because I have I have an old-fashioned sense that the work should stand on its own, and I have trouble letting go of that. I had it even from the beginning of my acting career, where when people were go on this talk show and talk about the movie, and I was like, if the movie's good, they'll go see it, whatever, that kind of shit. And yeah, you laugh at me because it's so ridiculous to think like that, but I still...
No, I actually wasn't laughing. It was more of a friendly laugh. No, because I get it, right? I spent a lot of years building it because I did start blogging. And one of the things that works in blogging is building a community.
Right.
You don't get the reach of the New York Times or the Washington Post. What you get is a bunch of readers, and it's a two-way relationship. And I really like it, but I also know a lot of people who are deeply uncomfortable with it, right? They find it... they want the page between them and their readers. And I get that.
I believe that humility is a super important quality. We have so much to learn from others, and that's why I love Masterclass. Through my own research, I've really come to appreciate the creative practice of the writer Joyce Carol Oates, and she just happens to have a fascinating class about short stories. I'm sure that pretty soon I'll be quoting it to anyone who will listen. With Masterclass, you can learn from the best to become your best. Plans start at just $10 a month, and that gives you unlimited access to over 200 classes. They're taught by the world's best business leaders, writers, chefs, and more. And every new membership comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee. That's the kind of learning I like, low stakes. Learn to eat more ethically, healthfully, and sustainably with Michael Pollan, or build habits that stick with Atomic Habits author James Clear. These are bite-sized lessons with big impact, which means they can fit into even the busiest schedules. And they really make a difference. 3 out of 4 surveyed members feel inspired every time they watch Masterclass. Right now, our listeners get an additional 15% off any annual membership at masterclass.com/failbetter. That's 15% off at masterclass.com/failbetter. masterclass.com/failbetter. I would love to kind of backtrack and take me through your own childhood version of Family Ties, which is what I imagine your life must have been like. I had a pretty normal Upper West Side childhood, which is not very normal, right? Which is very liberal, right?
Oh yeah. Well, Upper West Side was I knew people who went to socialist like sleepaway camp, right? Yeah. That was still, I think they were closing down by that time in the 70s, but they still existed into the 60s and 70s. And, I knew some older kids of communists who'd gone off to sing, like read the Daily Worker
Yes,
and sing socialist
my
songs.
grandfather was part of that. He was a
Oh, okay. So you.
he emigrated from Ukraine, and he the socialist camps. He was a playwright for kids. You know, he would write these socialist screed plays for these kids to perform. So yeah, I get it.
Well, that must be amazing to read your grandfather's plays.
Don't have it.
now.
Don't have.
Don't have it.
Don't only have references to it.
Oh no.
Don't have any of it. Yeah.
But so I grew up in a very liberal milieu. The funny thing was my mother's parents were from Western New York, and my grandfather was a Republican. He was the head of his county party for a while. He was an alderman. But as far as I knew, I didn't know any Republicans. And I said this to my mother years later, and she said, well, we weren't hiding it from you. It was just, I'm not even sure that's true. But then I went to high school at a pretty fancy private school.
You went to Riverdale. Right?
Riverdale, yeah. It was not that fancy then. And then I got, despite my really shockingly abysmal high school GPA, thanks in part to the fact that like it was their job to get me into a good school, and thanks in part to the fact that I was born in 1973 at the very close to the trough after the baby boom. So I had a very small generation, and Penn was admitting a lot higher percentage of their classmates than they are now, of their applicants than they are now. So I went off to Penn. I spent 4 years there studying English with a minor in economics, which would turn out to be useful.
Yeah.
Surprisingly.
What was the plan? I mean, I the shorthand of your sentimental education is liberal to libertarian to what you call yourself now, liberal-tarian, which I
that's about right.
And so, so at this point, you're in college. You're setting goals for yourself. I'm imagining you're reading. You're thinking, I'm going to have something to do in the writing business.
Oh yeah, no. I decided I wanted to be a writer when I was 8. I wrote a novel in like one of those black and white composition books.
What was it about?
It was about a girl named Janie who goes on a bus. I did not have wide life experience, and going on a bus was about the most exciting thing I could think of at the age of 8.
Does she get off the bus at any point?
She does. She meets all sorts of people.
She does.
She met a talking bird.
Look. The bus as a driver of plot is perfectly respectable, and for an 8-year-old, I think it's pretty damn smart.
But then I wrote a novel right after college, but it was like the worst novel ever written in the English language, and thank God I no longer have a copy.
Oh, tell me about it. This is a failure. This is a failure I need to hear about.
It was a stunning failure. It was, I hadn't done anything. I had grown up on the Upper West Side. I'd gone to private school. I had attended an Ivy League college. And unsurprisingly, my heroine had grown up on the Upper West Side, attended an Ivy League school.
Sure.
It was about a group of old friends.
They get on a bus.
School.
They all get on a bus together.
No, they reunite for Thanksgiving dinner.
Well, that's not terrible.
It wasn't a terrible thing, but I was not
that.
very good at what I was doing. Right? I was good at the sentence level. I was not good at the plot and structure level. But the thing is, all writers are like this. And so when young writers ask me for advice, the first thing I tell them is do not go into this business. It's collapsing. But the second thing I tell them is, look, you have to be comfortable with the fact that your work's not going to be very good a lot of the time. And that you have to take the not very good work and make it better rather than thinking, well, I can't start because it's not perfect yet. It's not perfect in my head. It's never going to be perfect in your head.
What are the parameters, do you think, that go into a work that's going to be good or a work that's not going to be good? And how can you only figure that out by executing, or can you figure that out? For myself, it has to do with what is resonating with me in some way.
Yeah.
But I won't listen to that. I'll go, I'm gonna fucking, I'm gonna make this work. I'm gonna make this into something that resonates with me. And I think that can work, and that's where the struggle is. But do you think can you kind of head that off at the pass? And is that some kind of advice that you give people as kind of an expert on failure and its success, which is what you are, whether or not you want to
Look,
be?
So for writers, right, there's famously 2 kinds. There's the pantsers and the planners.
I didn't know that.
I'm definitely a pantser.
Pantser?
Right? And by the seat of your pants.
Oh,
right. You just my preferred writing mode is that I'm going to launch in and then I'm going to come up, 8,000 words later and be like, wow, that needs a lot of work. My husband's preferred mode is the opposite. He's also a writer, and his favorite mode is he knows exactly how it's supposed to be laid out. He knows what the structure looks like. He's a movie critic in addition to a journalist. And so he has a lot of sense of movies are much more structured, or they're known to be much more, people talk much more explicitly about structure in the movies than they do in journalism.
Plot.
Right. But I tend to try to kind of naturally towards vague goal points where okay, here I'm going to turn, here's going to be the surprise, etc. Whereas Peter is just nope, I know what the sections are. I know exactly what goes in each of them before he starts.
Is there a similar sense when you're writing a journalistic piece of, gee, I don't want them to leave in the middle of this piece. I've got to.
Oh, absolutely.
I've got to give them something here in the second act of this piece that's going to keep them reading in their seats till the end. Yes, there is, huh?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So I look at what I'm doing and I say, okay, where is the audience right now? Are they arguing with me? Are they enjoying themselves? Are they getting kind of bored because we just did a whole paragraph of statistics? And then I try to work with that. So if we're getting kind of bored because I just did a whole paragraph of statistics, then I stop and I say, okay, we need a joke. Or I need to just acknowledge, or if I think they're confused, we need to acknowledge that you were confused and just ask you, bear with me for a minute. I'm going to clear this confusion up. I know that, right? I think about it all the time. Do you, when you're writing, talking, acting, think about the audience?
Probably not enough. Probably not enough. But while you were saying that, I was thinking from my own experience of doing a play, and I've only just done one, and it was a dark play, but like many dark plays had moments of dark comedy in it, and I was amazed at how different the show would play to different audiences. Whether I got the sense almost immediately what version of the play the audience was in for, wanted. If they laughed, if they just jumped at a laugh right in the beginning, it was like, oh, they want to laugh. Or if they didn't, it was like, oh, they want to go there. And it was kind of fun as a performer to be led and then lead them into that area. But it was very unconscious. And I think it probably is for you at this point, being so experienced, to have those moments of reaching out, leading the audience, being led by the audience, that kind of a thing.
Yeah, they're just always there, right? I mean, they're just always in my head. I just know. I mean, in part because I am the things. So you asked what things do I find go best? And I also think this probably varies by writer, but for me, the things that always go best are the things I am resonating with, the things where I am the primary audience, right? Where I really want to read a 3,000-word essay on the history of American pie and why people aren't making it, right? And I will say that while I don't know that was the best read piece I've ever done, the people who reached out, the people for whom that was the audience, I got so many emails and letters from people who love pie, loved their moms, wanted to talk about, or their dads in some cases, or their grandma, and wanted to talk about what it had meant for them to have this iconic food and to, come downstairs on a cool Vermont morning and get the huckleberry pie your grandmother had just pulled out of the oven. And I love those pieces. I love, those when I am passionate, whether either positively or negatively, when I am passionate about it, those are the pieces that I love the most. And also often pieces that people will come back to me again and again, and say, I remember that.
Well, this is what I was going to say, is that whatever words you want to put on that feeling, I would put joy on it.
Yeah.
Not because you love pie, but because you love thinking about it, talking about it, writing about it, knowing about it, and you love it. But
oh yeah, I definitely actually love it, but also love thinking about it.
Yeah, you're 360 around this joy of this subject, and that that comes through.
Exactly. And I think, I mean, to go back to the thing we were talking about at the beginning, is that do you define success as having a ton of people reading this and being a bestseller or, you know, being interviewed, or do you find it as having done that? Right? As having gotten to spend the 6 hours. And the older I get, the more inclined I am. I mean, you know, I guess in fairness, I've already had a fair degree of success in my profession, so maybe it's now easier to, but the thing itself has to be the success, not how other people reacted to it. Look, you got to pay the mortgage, you got to put but at the end of the day, it has to be, I think, that I did a thing that I loved.
This episode of Fail Better is brought to you by Booking.com. If you're looking to expand the reach of your vacation rental business, you've got to check out Booking.com. Since 2010, they've helped over 1.8 billion guests find a place to stay. Yes, 1.8 billion with a B. But here's the thing. Most vacation rental hosts don't even realize they can list their properties on Booking.com. And if you're not on the platform, your rental is basically invisible to millions of Booking.com travelers worldwide. After all, they can't book what they can't see, right? When you list on Booking.com, your property gets seen by a massive global audience of all different kinds of travelers. You get more visibility, more bookings, and more opportunity to grow your rental business. And it honestly couldn't be easier. You can register your property in as little as 15 minutes, and nearly half of Booking.com hosts get their first booking within 1 week. So if your vacation rental isn't listed on Booking.com, it could be invisible to millions of travelers searching the platform. Don't miss out on consistent bookings and global reach. Head over to Booking.com and start your listing today. Get seen, get booked on Booking.com. How did you get from liberal to libertarian? Was it, you know, in the way that we rebel against our parents? You know, was your rebellion to be more conservative in this sense? I know that you read Milton Friedman at some point and was
Yes,
and Ayn Rand. You had a pen name that was
yes.
Jane
Although,
Galt, right?
I should explain that I was never an objectivist.
What is an objectivist?
You know, an objectivist is the movement Ayn Rand started. I picked that pen name in the stupidest way possible, which is that when I was young and the internet was new.
When I was young and the internet was new.
And the internet was new, we were all galloping
I feel a song
through.
coming on.
Yes. So I think it was like 1996. I discovered the New York Times comment forums, and I went in and I was lurking, and then there was someone I wanted to respond to, and he was super lefty of a type that you and I will both recognize fairly well from the Upper West Side. Of like, he called anyone who was to the right of like Chairman Mao
fascist
or Randroid.
Oh,
No, Randroid.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to respond to him, and then it made you pick a handle, and I thought, oh, this will make him mad. And then I did not realize how that choice, and then I got it as my email because I did not realize how that choice would reverberate through my career. And so I started changing, and yet I tended to keep fairly quiet about it because I then went back and lived on the Upper West Side, and it was only the internet. Yeah. Closet Galt. I mean, I actually remember being in the elevator of my parents' building, and there was a kind of classic Upper West Side person who had like the dark hair streaked with gray piled in a messy bun on top of her head, and she wore a lot of like hemp clothing or like unstructured linen, and she was married to a violinist. So you kind of get the type. Mm-hmm. So I got in the elevator in my parents' building. I wasn't living there anymore, but I got it. And I'm riding upstairs carrying my copy of Free to Choose, and all of a sudden I see she's looking at it. And I thought, oh no, she knows what it is. And before she gets, and so I'm very silent, and I'm just pretending I don't see her. And I've known this woman my whole life, lightly. And as she gets off the elevator, she said, "Good book." And I was like, it was like I had found the other gay person in my 300-person Iowa town.
It's like you were in the Dakota. You just met Ruth Gordon.
Yes. And then I told my mother that, and my mother said, "Oh, she's a fascist."
Yeah, fascist, of course. But you know what's interesting to me is to talk to you on this subject, because you've slept with the enemy in a way.
Yeah.
You've been there. You did that. You thought about it. And I'm sitting here and I'm looking at our present day kind of conundrums here. And when I look at your progression, I think you can look at it from both sides in a way that I think is really instructive. And I wonder if you've thought about it that way, that we are
sure. Look,
we're in a moment.
I think there are multiple ways to be a libertarian, right? There's a way that's obsessed with taxes. I am not one of those libertarians, right? I have been now since 2007, I think was the first time I was on a panel and just said, Republicans, the cutting taxes thing is done. This is not even a good political strategy. It's
what just happened?
Creating these. They didn't listen to me, obviously, because so I'm not that kind of libertarian. I'm a libertarian who is skeptical of government power in a number of ways. On a lot of regulatory stuff. And that's not to say that I think we should just let people just dump their toxic waste into a river, right? But I think what you're seeing now in California, right, is you can't build houses because the environmental regulation is so costly to get through. Or there's an example in my neighborhood in Washington where the NIMBYs have been delaying this project for 10 years. And one of the things that they, negotiating with the developers. And one of the things they demanded was a grocery store. But because they keep delaying the project, there's 2 grocery stores have pulled out. And now the third one that they have is smaller than the previous 2. And the neighborhood is like, no, we have to hold out for the bigger grocery store. It's like, do you want a grocery store or do you want to just have this fight endlessly?
But can I interject and use your own kind of arguments against you for a moment, which is you talked about in that TED Talk is what do we owe the future? And I think that is what people are trying to figure out with regulations is what do we owe the future?
I think it depends on the regulation, right? A lot of regulations end up, look, I'm not a just don't ever regulate anything ever, right? I'm not an anarcho-capitalist. I just lean on the side of what if government did less stuff. And how we should think about government doing stuff, right? How we should think about when you give government power, where does that actually end up? Because the one thing that I think people do is they look at real problems in the real world that they want the government to fix, and then they kind of imagine an ideal government solution, and then they compare the ideal solution to the real world thing, but the solution you're going to put in place is not going to look like your ideal system, right? And I think you can see this whether or not you supported Obamacare, that Obamacare did not look like what anyone thought it was going to look like. It ended up being incredibly more complicated and covered fewer people and in various ways just wasn't what you'd imagined because the real world process of doing stuff is much harder. And if I think about the tech guys, I think that what people think it's about is not so much about I did this all by myself. No one's allowed to take my money. And it's much more about, I am doing this very difficult thing, and the government is coming in and trying to tell me how to do this very difficult thing. And they have no idea what it's like to even do the thing, right? They're standing outside and offering notes. And that is what maddens them. Much less the should the tax rate be 40% or 45%? Because those guys have so much money, they're not going to miss it. They really, I don't know, they might quibble with that, but I would say the extra utility they're getting from the money they might lose to higher taxes is not much, but the extra utility that they will lose to not being able to run their companies the way they want to run their companies is large.
But it does seem to me that they're infected by this idea that because they were a success in one area, that they know everything about everything else. These people.
Oh yeah, everyone is. All the journalists I know who could totally be off, running a Fortune 500 company if they weren't so busy with their incredibly important reported feature on, the future of pizza. Everyone thinks that they.
Well, I think we have the Doge experience right in front of us, right?
Right. That's exactly what happened. If Elon Musk had acted, everyone says they want to get businessmen or everyone on the right anyway. We need to get businessmen in there to bring real market discipline in. Well, if he'd acted like a CEO going in to do a turnaround does not just walk in and fire everyone he can find in the first day. He goes on a listening tour. He tries to figure out how the thing works and what needs to change. And then maybe he fires everyone, 3 months later, but at least he stops to figure out, and Musk didn't do that.
But I just can't help but believe that the kind of egotism and the blindness involved with these people is endemic at this point, that their massive success has turned them into, these heroic figures in their own minds that think that their success can translate into any other arena.
Yeah. I mean, I will argue, because I'm a libertarian, I will argue that anyone who does anything that's unique and takes the kind of risk-taking and intensity, it is a little heroic.
Risk-taking.
Yeah, I mean, they took a lot of risk. They put it on the line, and they made cool things happen.
Then the question is, do you want your government to be a risk-taking entity?
Well, so this is a really interesting question, is how do we think about how the government should take risk? In some ways, I do want the government to be more of a risk-taking entity. So, for example, the way we fund science right now, we tend to fund older scientists who have established labs. And we tend to fund, if you think about it like baseball, we fund singles instead of home runs, right? Home runs are harder to hit. So you're going to have a lower hit rate. But the Silicon Valley mentality is fund a lot of home runs, and a lot of them are just going to strike out. But the ones that don't are going to go, take us into the future. We could do more of that with our science funding. But those risks should not be on people who made plans based on decades-long promises that the government gave them. We should not be saying, well, we're going to take a risk with the disability insurance. The disability insurance system could probably use some reform, but not in a way that's going to risk people who are disabled not being able to feed themselves or not getting the assistance they need to, be healthy, right? Those are different questions. But on the things where the government also does have a role in trying to push us into the future. It does have a role in, for example, funding science research, which the Trump administration is, going after in order to get at the woke people he's mad at in universities. And I think that's terrible. Right, this is the opposite of how we should be approaching this. We should be rethinking our science funding a little bit, but we should understand that this is the kind of risk government should take.
You look at the one success of Trump's first term, and that was throwing all that money at getting a COVID vaccine, and it was great. We should do more of that. I mean, I don't want to give him credit because, who wouldn't have done that? I mean, any president would have had to have done that, but that was investing in a home run. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it was. I'm actually going to argue that he did it better than Hillary Clinton would have for a couple of reasons.
Okay.
Well, so for one thing, he had a pharmaceutical CEO running HHS. And many people have some qualms about that. But when you have a pandemic and what you really need is a vaccine, the dude who has been running a company that develops vaccines is exactly the guy. So Alex Azar was a great person to have in charge then, because he not only understood we need this vaccine, he understood how trials worked, how to set up the funding so that it would have maximum effectiveness for maximum speed. And then he went out and he also thought about the distribution, right? He thought about, you have to have what's called a cold chain where it's always refrigerated how are we going to do that? He got the military involved. And I think that the Clinton administration would have had a hard time doing two things. First of all, that person would almost certainly have been a Democratic official and not an executive who had actually done this job. But the other thing is that I think they would have had a hard time just saying, sky's the limit. You know what? I am just going to funnel money into your... And by the way, this was a cost savings for the American consumer. We saved so much money by reopening the economy that the money we spent on whatever extra we spent on the vaccines was irrelevant. But politically, that would have been just give a corporation tons of money, especially a pharmaceutical manufacturer. That would have been a hard sell for Democrats politically within the coalition. And so I actually think, I'm not saying this was personal to Trump.
Yes,
I don't think it was.
He got lucky.
But I do think that by luck, it was better to have his administration for that specific job than it would have been to have a Democratic administration.
Yeah. I can see that. No, really, I can. But to kind of wrap up, I'm just to go back to the beginning of our conversation. I'm while you're saying those things, I'm just thinking of like we're just so addicted to our ease. Again, to get back to something that we talked about before, it's like, but that's killing us. That's not killing us physically. That's killing us soulfully, I think. And we talked about how important a struggle is for your process. If it comes easy, it's not necessarily something that's that good for you. And I think that we have, if we look at just all the bubbles that you talk about, like, the social media bubbles, all the bubbles they're all about ease. They're all about not being confronted, not being made uncomfortable. And that there's something, it seems to me, that we've come to at some point recently in history where ease and smooth sailing has become the thing that is the most coveted and not the struggle. It doesn't seem like we want the struggle anymore, when the struggle is actually what makes us the most human and the most grown.
Well, maybe it's just that we have the choice for the first time in human history, right?
I suppose that's true.
We don't have to struggle against the land. We don't have to struggle against, and I think that is actually something that we are going to have to think hard about, is how do we maintain our struggle? Because I agree with you. That is something, it's not just something that makes us human. It is something that makes us happy. When you look back at, like when you beat your 5-year-old cousin at pool, maybe you had a good time playing with your cousin, but you don't really feel good about that. Right? You beat a 5-year-old.
Oh, as an adult?
Yeah.
I thought you were 5.
Right. No, sorry. Yeah. If you beat a 5-year-old at pool, you just don't feel great about that.
Well,
on the other hand,
depends how much money we were betting, really.
Well, fair enough. But on the other hand, if you came in like number 15th at the World Pool Championships, you would be sad you didn't come in number 1, but you'd feel a lot better about yourself than you would if your metric was, I beat my 5-year-old cousin at pool. And that is the thing, is that what we remember is our struggles. It is the things that we struggled for, and sometimes the things we didn't get, and we feel bad about that, but also the things we did get. And we feel great about that because of the struggle. That is what's valuable about it, right? I just spent a weekend painting an old desk of my aunt's, and it would have probably been cheaper to go buy a new desk than to do all the. But I love that thing now. I pass it every time, and I just smile because it's mine.
Well, that's why I find it fascinating to talk to you, because you have traversed the spectrum in many ways. If we go, like we said in the beginning, from liberal to libertarian to liberal-tarian, and what I'm often trying to figure out, like many people in the country right now, is how do we speak to one another? And to watch you debate yourself is exemplary. It's an exemplary way to see how the debate might happen, because you are at home on both sides in some ways, which is admirable, and open. And so, in ending, I'd just like to thank you for having that discussion within yourself and hopefully modeling how we can start to have this discussion in this country.
Well, it's very kind.
Or in the world.
Thank you for having me on. This has been an amazing discussion and really enjoyable.
Thanks so much for listening to Fail Better. If you haven't subscribed to Lemonada Premium yet, now's the perfect time, because guess what? You can listen completely ad-free. Plus, you'll unlock exclusive bonus content like the full version of my post-interview thoughts that you won't hear anywhere else. That's more of my recaps on interviews with guests like Chris Carter and Emily Deschanel. Just tap that subscribe button on Apple Podcasts or head to lemonadapremium.com to subscribe on any other app. That's lemonadapremium.com. Don't miss out. Fail Better is a production of Lemonada Media in coordination with King Baby. It is produced by Keegan Zema, Aria Bracci, and Donnie Matias. Our engineer is Brian Castillo. Our SVP of Weekly is Steve Nelson. Special thanks to Carl Ackerman, Tom Kupinski, Brad Davidson, and Jonathan Smith. The show is executive produced by Stephanie Whittles-Wax, Jessica Cordova Kramer, and me, David Duchovny. The music is also by me and my band, the lovely Colin Lee, Pat McCusker, Mitch Stewart, Davis Rowan, and Sebastian Modak. You can find us online at Lemonada Media, and you can find me at David Duchovny. Follow Fail Better wherever you get your podcasts, or listen ad-free on Amazon Music with your Prime membership.